And if you pretend a problem doesn't exist, then you can't tackle the problem.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that we all love women's football so much is partly to do with how kind of inclusive it feels, like not just at the grassroots where we're kind of more involved, but also like even in the top flight. More so often than the men's game, in fact. But I think sometimes the fact that women's football has that label of being inclusive kind of makes us as fans, as teams, as managers, as players, as the WSL itself, sometimes complacent when things happen that actually are really serious, and it kind of stops them looking at these kind of systemic issues for what they are. So I guess recently that has really come to the fore, I think. So with Bunny Shaw, we kind of touched on it last week that the WSL hadn't actually issued a statement specifically calling out racial abuse. They still haven't done that, which I'm actually really surprised about.
I'm shocked by it. It feels like, especially with how much they have been questioned and criticised for not doing that. To have even just to
it's like this is not the time to double down and close ranks. This is the time to be like, okay, sorry, we did that wrong.
We've dropped the ball.
This is actually what we think. And not just that, there's been actually a huge silence from players, which I think has been really surprising.
It's surprising, and we were wondering, like, have they been told not to say anything? That's how shocking it is that no one's come out with stuff. I mean,
Lotta,
a couple of players.
Lotta Moy did a statement, didn't she? Which was reposted by Emily Fox, I think.
A couple of the players reshared Lotta Moy's statement, and then I think Manuela Zinsberger, the Arsenal goalkeeper, also posted. But apart from that, in terms of explicit, there were other statements from players that were sort of
be kind,
general showing of support to Bunny, but in terms of explicit calling out, it was limited as far as I could see to those two.
I just think it's so interesting because I listened to an interview with Farrah Williams, and she was saying, as a player, one of the options she would have thought about and what she thought Man City could have done was all refuse to travel down to that Arsenal game, which Bunny didn't come to, as a show of solidarity. They are so far from that, not even posting on social media about it. So I think that has been actually quite shocking, and I think, you know, it's a conversation that comes up a lot. I know Eni Aluko's spoken about it a lot, the kind of lack of diversity in the national system. I think we had 8.6% of players in the World Cup squad in 2023 weren't white, which is obviously terrible. And when you look at our squads, I mean, the Arsenal squad was criticised for it last season. Compared to the men's game, it is a really stark issue.
When we talk about discrimination and racism in football, it's like so many, the issue is from so many angles. But in terms of actual pathways for people into football, so much of it comes down to funding. Because men's football academies, there's so much support for players and players' families, and making it accessible for talented young footballers to have access to those academies, which there just historically has not been for women's football. It's not accessible for people from all different backgrounds to be able to have access to these talent pathways, and therefore it becomes like a inherently closed off system.
And then the problem that then happens, it becomes systemic, because then like young players of colour can't see themselves replicated in, like, if you think about how many South Asian players there are, like really, I think almost none. If you can't see yourself, then like, why would you ever think that was a viable path for you? And so that has, I think, probably compounded in the women's game. But then I know that there has been loads more kind of investment in the last kind of 5 years or whatever in trying to tackle that, but I guess it's just not trickling through yet to the top
it's
level.
Obviously a slow.
But I think there's still, you know, it's unbelievable that the league hasn't issued a statement about racial abuse. Like, they need to show that they actually care as well. Like, it's not enough to say, well, we have put money in.
And there's a lot of things in the men's game. So Kick It Out is a really prominent campaign within the men's game, because I feel like the discussions, unfortunately, of racial abuse received by players are much more prominent in the men's game.
Because it's much higher profile.
Because it's higher profile.
It's more established.
But it feels like there is at least conversations happening in the men's game that don't happen in the women's game. It feels like every time there's an instance of racial abuse being directed at a player, it's like, oh, and that was that.
It's brushed under the carpet.
Or like, or people say, oh no, it's not a problem in the women's game.
There's this veneer of perfectionism like within the women's game.
And
like
inclusivity and diversity, and it's just not true.
There is nothing inherently about football that precludes or excludes anybody. And yet we have let the game develop in such a way that it does.
Totally. And if you pretend a problem doesn't exist, then you can't tackle the problem.